back, those are my esteemed colleagues with Junior Achievement here in Eastern Iowa. Everyone wave. So if you have an opportunity to connect us with a community partner, or you yourself want to plug in at some point in time, I would really encourage you to directly connect with those doing the work, because no one does it better than my colleagues in the back. So privileged to have you all here with us. I have had the opportunity likely to meet 95% of you, or know 95% of you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Christine Landa. I have the proud privilege of serving as market lead for Junior Achievement here in Eastern Iowa. And I thought about what I might say this morning that would be relevant to all of you. Thank you, Erin. She is my technical advisor. And I'm grateful for that. As we look ahead, we are nearing our 60th anniversary here in Eastern Iowa next spring, which I think is a milestone to be celebrated, but it also is representative of 6 decades of partnerships between schools and our community and leaders that have brought work to life in schools in our region. And proudly serving for more than half of that time here on staff, I've had the privilege to listen to a lot of ideation, innovation, and really thought leadership in the space of what do we need in the corporate sector and what do we need in the academic sector, and how do we bridge the best of both to invest in our kids for the future, for their best selves. And that's why I'm so excited that you're all here today, because you have a desire to continue that practice here in the region. We're privileged to have corporations that have leadership and resources voluntarily, through board leadership, financially, that are stepping up to the table and wanting to help. And we have probably some of the best schools in the country that have kids at their forefront of thought of how do we challenge the status quo, how do we make their educational pathway most meaningful, and how can we prepare them to adult in life. And the convergence is where Junior Achievement meets in the middle. And it's really a privilege to listen to both sides and to anchor the work. This new chapter of work that we are embarking upon is pretty exciting. You may have seen some teasers in the Gazette recently about the work and how Junior Achievement historically is now evolving into new spaces. And we have a privilege today to have some of those thought leaders on a more national level with Junior Achievement to talk about that scope, what it's doing across the country, how it's changing schools, and how it's positively impacting kids. Here in Eastern Iowa, we've listened to a lot of our superintendents talk about change, the change that they need, the resources that they desire, and the direction they're going. And we've tried to come alongside of them and align in every way we can. And I listened to a lot of our corporate partners about the emerging workforce and the skill sets and the competencies and the training that they need to be employable. And I've been able to sit back and look at my peer group in Junior Achievement, and some are in the same place we are, and some are ahead of where we're at. And we have the privilege of seeing where they're going. And that's what you're going to see here today. Before we get into that, we are going to set the stage. You're going to hear briefly from our board leader, our board champion, that has afforded us the opportunity to envision that work and mobilize those resources so that we can accommodate the priorities that schools are telling us are now for kids and learning. And we're going to be able to reach into our schools, and we have several of those leaders here, instructional coaches, lead teachers, and superintendents, to talk about what we've activated and how it's making a positive difference. Can't wait for them to give you a little snippet. And also, it's rare that here in Eastern Iowa, we've had someone on a national scale come and talk about Junior Achievement as a whole. And we are honored to have our President and CEO, Jack Harris, and his esteemed colleague, Callie Majors, who heads up 3DE National, here to tell you a little bit about how it got started, how it's spreading, and the change it's making positively today across our country. And I'm excited that Eastern Iowa is at the forefront of that change, that we got in when we could, because it's making a difference for our kids. So without further ado, I'd love to invite up front briefly the Regional Executive Board Chair, Melissa Winter from Green State Credit Union, if you please. Thank
you very much. I appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of all of our regional boards for junior achievement, I'm so pleased that you're here. It's going to be a great day. And I have some colleagues here, so thanks for coming. On behalf of Green State Credit Union, though, we truly believe in investing in our communities. And this really afforded us a great opportunity to connect with kids, to connect with businesses, and really make a difference. So we're really proud to be a sponsor. And I think Jack was asking me last night at dinner what I wanted you all to take away today. And what I hope that is that you find a way to connect with junior achievement and where we're going. A lot of people remember what we were as classroom education, which we still are, and I love that because I teach kindergarten, my favorite. Excuse me. But where we're going is really exciting. And we're going to change the landscape of the students coming out of schools. As an employer, it's going to be what I'm looking for. I want the collaboration, I want the communication skills, I want them to be problem solvers. And this is going to do that. So what you're going to hear today is really exciting. It's really sometimes hard to get your head around. So please know that the junior achievement team is going to be here to answer questions, to walk you through it, and to get you there. But what Will is doing at Alburnett and Doug is doing at College Community and the future schools that are coming on, it's going to be amazing. So again, thank you for being here today. We appreciate it.
As Melissa said, there's a way to plug in to the work, either now or in the future. Maybe you know someone who will want to plug in that you want to introduce us to. So be open-minded, but most importantly, today is about being informed and being inspired, and I guarantee both. Because I have the honor of introducing my friend, longtime colleague, and now head of our fine organization, Jack Harris. Please join me in welcoming Jack.
Good morning, everybody. Really excited to be here. Just as a quick aside before we start getting into the 3DE and JA story, across the network, I think you all should know that JA of Eastern Iowa is held at a very, very high level of reputation across the network. And so the work that's been done here from a board perspective, leadership perspective with Christine, and those of you that have been involved, is noticed and has really put this region on the map from a JA perspective. So just huge shout out to all the work that's done up to date. Little quick background just in terms of myself, so some of what I'll say today makes sense. I've been in the land of JA for over 20 years. I actually started on the international side of the organization and then moved over to JA of Georgia in Atlanta and was leading JA of Georgia for a 10-year period of time. It was during that period of time that 3DE was developed. So when you hear about 3DE, it was developed within JA of Georgia in partnership with the local school districts in the Atlanta area. So I think one of the things that's really, really important about 3DE is actually it was co-designed with school districts. And even that name 3DE was a symbolism to a three-way joint venture between school districts, junior achievement, and local business community in Atlanta. And so it's the ethos that Christine was talking about of like how those sectors come together in a really effective way. So then about 5 years ago, after doing some initial pilot work with 3DE in Atlanta, we created this national entity of 3DE National and had an expanded pilot where now there's 60 schools across 13 states. Here in the Cedar Rapids area in Eastern Iowa, that is one of those 13 locations or 13 states across the country right now. And we're going to speak to like what outcomes we've seen during that time. So we've closed out the expanded pilot. We're now moving into full scale. I had been leading 3D, continue to with Callie, who's in the back there, originating from and then also now CEO for Junior Achievement USA. as we look at what this type of model looks like within the broader organization. So that's just a little bit of background, just a little bit of context. This is where it started though. And this belief statement that that education really should be a catalyst for economic opportunity. I think just growing up in the U.S., it's kind of like it's this ethos of what we think, right? So education should be a part of opening up opportunities. And I think no matter where you sit within, whether within education, within the employer community, as a parent, that statement of that education should expand economic opportunity, to be a catalyst for economic opportunity, is a deep belief within the U.S. But we also know that for many students, that reality has not played itself out, and it's become a very complex world. The economy itself is complex, changing very rapidly, and so then there's always this call of like saying, are we actually equipping the next generation with the skills, the mindsets, the behaviors, the competencies that they'll need to navigate what is a very rapidly changing world around us? And that is what, back in 2013, when we were first having this conversation with the school districts, it was actually school district, Fulton County Schools, that approached us at Junior Achievement and said, like, is there a way that we could just think about how we're doing education differently? And not do something that's just a bolt-on or trying to solve a part of it, but actually like really get in and rethink how we're doing teaching and learning at the high school level, that's addressing in a very comprehensive way, very systemic way of how we're thinking about education differently for the generation going forward. And some of these themes are common themes. So some of this isn't new information. And there's a lot of words on this slide, but I'll just paint the picture, right? In education circles, we all know what drives better student learning and better student engagement, especially at the high school level. And any one of us from our own experiences can know that too. So you want learning that's relevant, learning that's applicable, learning that's experiential, where it's hands-on, project-based learning, which is something that's been around the education circle for quite a while. All of that aspect of really getting in and being able to apply learning into real-world scenarios with projects, with companies or industries or employers, to be able to do it in a highly interdisciplinary way, highly active, highly dynamic. Like, we all know, evidence says, that's the best type of learning. Students will be engaged, learning will be relevant, they've got better academic comprehension because of it, because they're applying the concepts into real-world scenarios, and then all student achievement gains go forward. So the question that comes is like, so why is that so hard to accomplish? Like, why is it then so difficult to get that type of learning in every classroom, in every school environment? And it's because of the complexity of the education world that we live in, where you've got a project-based learning aspect to try to aspire to, but then standards-based accountabilities. Think of high school classrooms, most of the times like the core academic subjects, math, English, science, history, they're all taught kind of in their own silo. They're taught to a specific set of standards. They don't necessarily touch each other. They don't necessarily touch the real world. And then we end up with the age-old question that every single one of us asks, and all of our kids ask, like, why am I learning this in the first place, right? And so it's kind of like we've known this for decades, and it's a repetitive cycle that continues to happen. So what ends up happening is you do end up having certain programs, certain solutions that come to the table where you're like, oh, okay, we'll do this project-based thing here, or we'll connect with this company here, and we'll do some out of classroom work and activity. And typically what ends up happening, and I think our school district friends could attest to this, is that you'll end up seeing fads that come in and out of schools, based off of some of those aspects, and they don't have the sustaining sticking power. And the reason why is that a lot of that relies on individual teachers or individual classrooms to figure out, okay, what are the projects, how to design the curriculum, how am I going to find the companies to work with? And even when you get really great examples of that happening, as soon as that teacher leaves, or as soon as the company champion might leave, the project falls apart, right? So you have these moments, these glimmers, like, oh, that's what learning should look like. That's what the high school environment should look like. And we're all inspired by that, but then it seems short-lived. And from a teacher perspective, the amount of pressure that is on teachers right now, just in terms of accountabilities and time, you look at coming out of COVID, and just teacher retention, there's just a lot that teachers are taking on, and sometimes they feel like they're having to take on a lot without necessarily the support, the structure, the resources to help them through that. So at the end of the day, from a 3DE perspective, It's building a full model, something that's very comprehensive, sustainable, with all the implementation supports around it that bring rigor and relevance together in a really real way. How many of you have had experience with any sort of like case method in school, like either in university, post-grad, where you're learning through the case, real world case scenario of what's happening in a real world environment with a company, its industry, and thinking through as the protagonist in it, like, oh, okay, so if I was in that same situation, what would I do? What type of information would I need? What type of other analysis would I need to synthesize to figure out how I would solve for that solution, right? It's a really, really powerful way to learn, and it becomes multidisciplinary. So imagine that environment at the high school level, where all those subjects of math, science, English, history are learned in an interdisciplinary way of how those concepts are connected and applied into real world scenarios. Seems really simple, right? Like that would work. So what 3DE is a model that takes that type of learning, that pedagogy that we know is proven, and developing it for the high school level. So in every 3DE school, and you'll hear the examples, Matt as a launch teacher that's right in the middle of this with Prairie, you'll hear examples of this, but this is the key, these are the keys to understand, that in every 3DE school, when we talk about real world connectivity, typically what's happened across the US is that real world connectivity happens in the electives. So there's been really good work that's happened like within CTE or other types of like business electives or things of that nature, or even like capstone projects maybe in senior year. And that's been really, really solid, but it's been really hard to pull that real world connectivity across the core academic subjects. And it's those core academic subjects where we're losing students. When you look at reading and math proficiency in the country, for 9th grade algebra, 9th grade ELA, we're still as a country under 30% in terms of proficiency at those 9th grade reading and math levels. And so, as much as we might like put real world connectivity into the electives, we also have to lift core academics, right? Like in today's environment, a student might not necessarily need to go to college, but they definitely need to be able to graduate from high school with meaningful credentials, academic proficiency, the ability to navigate a career in a highly complex environment. So we've got to figure out how we pull that across the core academics. And then along with that, what you see around this outside here is these competencies. That we know the academics, they're important, but they're not the only thing that we need anymore. Like in order to really thrive in today's environment, we all need to be effective collaborators, communicators, we need to have critical analytical thinking, creativity and innovation, self-direction, cultural agility. Like these are the competencies that are necessary in the workplace environment, whether you're an entrepreneur or going to work for a company or whatever the case might be. Those are highly critical skills. So think of it this way, right? Like many districts, I don't know if it happens here, you all have like a portrait of a graduate, is that so a theme, right? So portrait of a graduate being like, what are the skills, what are the behaviors, what are the mindsets that we want every student to graduate with from high school? And each district, each state might use different words, but they all kind of fall into those 6 categories. But think about it like learning a language or learning math. If you're learning math, there's this iterative process where you're practicing the concepts, and then each concept is building on it. And it's because of that practice and because of that iteration that we learn math, or that we learn a language. We need that same sort of system when it comes to competencies. It won't happen just by default. There needs to be like not just like one project here or there that's building on it, but a system that really is building it 9th to 10th to 11th to 12th. So in 3DE schools, think every 5 weeks, there's a different case challenge. Remember, this is built off case method. So there's a different case challenge that students are learning about a company, an industry, and a particular challenge that company or industry is going through at this point in time, tied to one of those competencies. One of those competencies has to be kind of explored to develop it. Students work in small group teams. They're researching and analyzing that challenge over the course of a 5-week period. They're working with coaches and advisors from that company, from that industry on their challenge and how they're thinking that through, and then pitching their solutions back at the end of that 5-week period. And instead of it happening just once in high school, it's happening every 5 weeks. Different company, different challenge. And all their core academic teachers are taking that challenge and weaving it in to their subject area as well. So from a student perspective, all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, wait a second, like I'm seeing this pop up in all of my different classes. And I'm seeing the application and relevance of everything that I'm learning as a part of this. So it becomes highly dynamic and builds on itself. Ninth grade is foundational, then it builds 10th grade, then 11th grade, then by 12th grade they're doing like 18-week consultancy projects with companies and like really, really deep stuff that helps build all those pieces together. There are, some of you might be thinking, okay, so I've heard like there's similarities, there's things I've heard in schools that are similar to this. You say, so why would this work any differently than something else? I got you, yeah, thanks. So, a few key things, we'll just hit on real fast. One is that this is a really good public-private partnership. So this really is about the education system, the local business community, junior achievement coming together and saying, how do we bring all of our best capabilities to the table to deliver for students in a way that's going to be really, is actually going to be able to move the needle. And that joint venture plays out really, really strong. It's also really cohort-based. So we all know that sense of belonging, sense of community for students is huge in high school. Think like in elementary school where students have that community, still exists a little bit in middle school, then all of a sudden high school, it just breaks apart. You don't have that same element, so it's bringing that cohort structure back, but also it's breaking down all the silos for the faculty. So typically, you know, if you were in like department meetings, if you're a faculty at a school, like you might meet with all the math teachers, you might meet with all the English teachers, you might meet with all the science teachers, but rarely are you meeting cross-discipline with all those teachers and talking about students, right? And really creating a community around it. And then, this is the big piece, on-the-ground implementation support. There's a lot of models out there that will say, hey, like we'll send our teachers to a 2-week boot camp on training project-based learning, and then they'll come back to the classroom and be like, that was awesome. And then like 3 weeks later, like I can't figure out how to do it, right? Because it's too difficult to like weave into a normal environment. This model has on-the-ground implementation support through JA, and being able to connect with the businesses, fund businesses, the case design, all those pieces, it's huge. I think you'll hear about that a little bit more. So with all of that to be said, let me just fast forward to where we are. So I mentioned that there's 13 states, a little over 30 school districts that are involved. You can see who all is involved with 3D schools this current school year. I think what's really cool that's kind of hidden in this list is that on one hand, if you look at the 30 largest school districts in the country, over half of them are represented in this list. So we're dealing with some of the most influential districts from the national education policy that are really working on driving this innovation from the inside out. And then we're working with districts of all different sorts and sizes and other ways as well. Guarantee you that there is no school in the country that wouldn't match up with one of the 63 schools that we currently have. You know, so when people say, oh, I don't know if this would work for our school, I don't know if this would work for our district, we now have like the full spectrum of every single type of school that's represented at 60 that we can help people see. Now it really can work, like this is what that would look like to do it. And then the outcomes. So at the end of the day, the theory of change here is pretty simple. It's just really hard to execute on. If you make learning more relevant, it's going to drive student engagement. If students are more engaged, they're going to show up and attendance is going to be higher. When attendance is higher, they're going to be leaning into the classwork, academic comprehension grows, you get reading, math proficiency lifts. When you get all of that, you get higher graduation rates. When you get higher graduation rates with students that now have all these 6 competencies, they want to enter into different types of post-secondary, they're going to persist through post-secondary. And you can see this across, these stats have stayed remarkably consistent over our last 10 years, even as we've been expanding different schools. Chronic absenteeism will usually drop by about 20%. You see the graduation rate increases, college enrollment increases. This, by the way, isn't saying that all students need to or should go to college, but what it is saying is that there's huge gaps of access and opportunity for students, especially coming from lower income schools, that if you can lift college enrollment, post-secondary enrollment, that's 2-year colleges also, by 30%, that's significant, you know, or even if that's getting a credential or certification degree of some sort. Reading, math proficiency, you can see those lifts. And then also on the more of the culture side of things, you can see what's happening from an engagement perspective. So I want to tap on this one stat real fast, where you see this increase in the relevance of school. from 46% to 86%. Student engagement right now, we're in a huge national crisis in terms of students being engaged or motivated about school and learning. So Gallup does a big national poll. They look at student engagement. They've got what they call an engagement cliff, where in fifth graders nationally, there's roughly 75% of fifth graders are engaged in school in the way that Gallup defines it. By the time it gets to 12th grade, it's less than a third. So less than a third of 12th graders are engaged in school, engaged in learning. And if they're not engaged in school, engaged in learning, they're probably engaged in other things that are not as productive. The number one aspect to that is whether or not students see relevance in school. So we do a national poll ourselves, so by saying, coming out of 8th grade, how many students feel like their education experience through 8th grade has felt applicable to real life or to the real world or to their lives? And consistently, that comes out around 46%. This past year was actually down to 38%. So it's been really declining, and in a 3DE environment, you can see that number just about doubles in terms of students being able to see that relevance, sense of belonging. You can see below here, just even the teacher aspect of it, 9% of teachers would recommend teaching within 3DE. So even though it's a lift, even though it's more work, it's, the teachers are seeing the benefits of it, seeing that community, and then from a principal perspective too. So I think, being able to have this backdrop of why this work exists, why we believe it's actually sustainable, why we believe it can happen in places where maybe some other things have kind of come through and it felt like, that didn't work, it didn't stick, we put a lot of resources into it. I think we've got this track record of consistency now that we build from. And I think that's a good segue to back to Christine, because I think what's happening here locally, be able to take kind of this bigger picture and then be able to match it like locally of what's happening here. There's a really, really powerful, compelling story that's unfolding here locally. So with that, I'll be around for questions later too. Yes. Thanks.
Let's give it up for Jack.